Sometimes I still walk past the front of my house, catch a glimpse of that gleam of reinforced steel, and I have to pinch myself. I probably broke the world record for the most over-engineered response to a nosy neighbor in human history. But let me tell you, it was worth every single penny, every strained muscle, and every bewildered look from the delivery guys. How did I get here, you ask? How did I, a reasonably quiet, admittedly private individual, end up installing what amounts to a bank vault door on my suburban home? Well, settle in, because this story is a doozy. And it all started because my homeowners association president, a woman whose personality was as overbearing as her perfume, decided she had the right to know what color my damn duvet cover was. Drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe the audacity that led to this. It all began innocently enough, or so it seemed, when I moved into the esteemed Willow Creek Estates. I bought the house for its quiet cul-de-sac, the mature trees, and the fact that it backed onto a small nature preserve. What I hadn't properly accounted for was Brenda McTavish, HOA president extraordinaire, queen of her own self-styled fiefdom, and the woman who apparently believed her jurisdiction extended into my very soul, or at least, into my living room. Brenda was, to put it mildly, a character. Picture this: early 50s, always impeccably, if somewhat ostentatiously, dressed in clothes that screamed, "Look at my disposable income," but whispered, "I have questionable taste." Her hair was a rigidly coiffed helmet, impervious to wind or reason, and she drove a gleaming white SUV, so enormous it probably had its own zip code, which she navigated through our narrow residential streets with the entitled aggression of a tank commander. My first run-in was over the shade of begonias I'd planted in my front flower bed. Apparently, Crimson Delight was not on the approved list of Scarlet Blaze or Ruby Radiance. I received a very official-looking letter, complete with a poorly photocopied swatch card, informing me of my grievous horticultural transgression. I'm an engineer by trade, a problem solver, a man who deals in logic and specifications. I read the HOA bylaws, all 300 painstaking pages of them, and found the relevant and surprisingly vague clause about harmonious planting schemes. I replied with a polite reference letter, pointing out the ambiguity and the subjective nature of harmonious, and included a datasheet for Crimson Delight, highlighting its pest resistance, a community benefit, surely. That, I think, was my first mistake. Brenda didn't like logic. She liked compliance. She especially didn't like it when you showed you'd actually read the rules. She clearly hadn't quite mastered herself, beyond her own interpretation of them. She expected you to quiver, apologize, and rip out the offending flora. My calm, factual response seemed to short-circuit something in her brain. She didn't reply directly to my letter. Instead, the fines started. $5 a day for non-compliant begonias. I paid the first one, then sent another letter stating I was paying under protest, and reiterated my position. The second fine arrived, this time $10 a day. It was then I realized I wasn't dealing with a rational administrator, but a petty tyrant. My neighbors, mostly older folks who'd lived here for years, just sighed and told me it was easier to go along with Brenda. She gets like this, old Mr. Henderson from across the street told me one afternoon, peering over his meticulously trimmed azaleas. "Wears you down, she does. Best just to plant the red ones, son." But something in me, that engineering stubbornness perhaps, just couldn't. It wasn't about the begonias anymore, it was about the principle. It was about a grown woman in a position of minor, hyper-local authority, who was acting like a medieval monarch. The next salvo was my mailbox. It was the original one, perfectly functional, standard black, but apparently, it lacked a certain je ne sais quoi that Brenda's newly amended regulations, passed with her board of sycophants rubber stamping it, I later learned, now mandated. This time it was a brass flag, not the existing silver one. Another letter, another fine, this one starting at $20. I looked into replacing the flag. It was a $30 part. But again, It was the gall, the sheer arbitrary nature of it. This went on for months, a slow, escalating war of passive aggression and official-looking stationery. I'd research, I'd write meticulously polite and legally grounded rebuttals, sometimes citing specific HOA codes back at her that she'd clearly overlooked or misinterpreted, or even clauses that directly contradicted her new amendments. She'd just invent new rules or increase the fines, her letters getting progressively more unhinged, filled with capitalized words and exclamation points. She even tried to fine me for the type of bird feeder I had, claiming it attracted undesirable avian elements. I kid you not. I had a small, simple feeder for chickadees and nuthatches. What did she want? Eagles only? The tipping point, the incident that launched 1,000 tons of steel, metaphorically speaking, though eventually literally, was her grand assertion about interior aesthetic cohesion. It began subtly. Brenda started making comments during her neighborhood patrols, which consisted of her slowly cruising in her oversized SUV, window down, sunglasses perched on her nose, scanning properties like a U-boat captain, looking for enemy shipping. She'd make pointed remarks to my neighbors, loud enough for me to overhear if I was in my yard, about how some people clearly didn't understand that community standards extended beyond the front lawn. There were whispers then. A new rumor that Brenda was trying to get the board to approve inspections, actual interior inspections of homes, to ensure decorative harmony and prevent unsightly internal disrepair that could affect collective property values. Most people laughed it off as Brenda being Brenda, another one of her power-mad fantasies. I should have paid more attention. I was planning a short trip, just a week, to visit my sister. I'd asked Mr. Henderson to keep an eye on the place, grab my mail. I double-checked all the locks, set the alarm, standard procedure. When I came back, pulling into my driveway feeling relaxed and refreshed, I noticed the first odd thing, a small scratch near the deadbolt on my front door, almost like a screwdriver slip. I shrugged it off, probably just me being clumsy with my keys in the past. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned. Tried again. Nothing. It went in, but it wouldn't engage. Annoyance started to bubble. Had the lock seized up while I was gone? I tried the knob lock. Same thing. My key, my house key, that I'd used just a week prior, no longer worked on my own front door. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a seized lock. This felt different. I walked around to the back door. Same story. My keys were useless. My heart was hammering now. Had I been robbed? But everything looked undisturbed from the outside. Windows were closed, no signs of forced entry beyond that tiny scratch. My mind raced. What the hell was going on? I called Mr. Henderson. He hurried over, concern etched on his face. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I explained the key situation. He tried his spare, the one I'd given him for emergencies. It didn't work either. "That's mighty peculiar," he muttered, scratching his head. "Mighty peculiar. I ain't seen a soul near your front door, 'cept for," he trailed off, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "'Cept for who, Mr. Henderson?" I pressed, that cold knot tightening. He shuffled his feet. "Well, Brenda was around, and there was a locksmith van here day before yesterday. I just figured you'd arranged for some work, maybe lost your keys on your trip and called ahead. A locksmith. Brenda." The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, infuriating clarity. My HOA president, the tin pot dictator of Willow Creek Estates, had changed the locks on my house while I was away. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. The violation, the absolute arrogance. My initial shock was rapidly being consumed by a towering glacial rage. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd nuked it from orbit. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was dealing with a man who planted the wrong begonias. She was about to find out she was dealing with a man who understood structural engineering, load-bearing capacities, and the beautiful, immutable physics of very, very thick steel. This wasn't just about begonias anymore. This was war. And I was going to build a fortress. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not just a nosy neighbor. This was a criminal act. She'd had my locks changed. The very locks I relied on for security, for privacy, for peace of mind. What had she done inside? Had she snooped through my personal belongings, my private papers, my life? The thought made my skin crawl. My blood boil with a fury so intense it was almost cold. My immediate priority was getting back into my own damn house. I called a 24-hour locksmith, a different one, naturally. When he arrived, looking sleepy but professional, I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice even, though inside I was a screaming inferno of indignation. I had my ID, my utility bills in my name for that address, my deed. I always keep copies of important documents in my car and online, a habit that was about to pay off. The locksmith, a burly guy named Sal, listened patiently, examined the locks, and whistled. "Yeah, these are new. Pretty standard job, but definitely new." "You didn't authorize this?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice tight. "I suspect my HOA president took it upon herself to do this while I was out of town." Sal blinked. "Your HOA? Lady, that's breaking and entering, basically, and destruction of property if they damage the old ones taking them out." He shook his head. "Heard some crazy HOA stories, but this is a new one." He got to work, and it took him a good hour to bypass and then replace the brand new, unauthorized locks that Brenda had presumptuously installed. As he worked, I walked around the perimeter, my earlier observations taking on a more sinister hue. That tiny scratch mark by the deadbolt. A clumsy locksmith working for Brenda, probably. Were there other marks? I felt like a detective on my own crime scene. The sheer audacity of it continued to astound me. What kind of person thinks they have the authority to do that? To violate someone's home, their sanctuary? When Sal finally got the door open, I almost didn't want to go inside. I was afraid of what I might find, or rather, what evidence of intrusion I'd see. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. The air was stale, undisturbed. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. My mail, collected by Mr. Henderson, was in a neat pile on the kitchen counter, where he'd left it through the back door before the locks were changed again. I walked through each room, my eyes scanning for anything amiss. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. Had she been in my bedroom, my office, my drawers? There were no obvious signs of disturbance, no ransacked drawers, no papers out of place. But there was a faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air that wasn't mine. It was a cloying, sweet floral perfume, Brenda's signature scent. My stomach churned. She had been in here, snooping, prowling, judging. I found it then, on my hallway table, right where anyone entering would see it. A crisp, new envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was a letter, typed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Brenda McTavish, President. It was a masterpiece of officious, condescending jargon. It stated that, pursuant to recently ratified neighborhood harmony protocols I'd never heard of and which I suspected were invented on the spot, a cursory wellness and standards check had been performed on my property due to concerns regarding upkeep and adherence to community aesthetic guidelines, both external and internal. It went on to say that, regrettably, they had been unable to gain consensual access, despite multiple attempts. A bald-faced lie. I hadn't received a single call or notice, and thus, in the interest of maintaining community standards and property values, they had secured the services of a professional locksmith to ensure the property's continued accessibility for necessary oversight. It was so outrageous, so blatantly illegal, I almost laughed. Almost. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the shock. She'd essentially admitted, in writing, to breaking into my house. The letter concluded with a list of minor interior discrepancies noted, which included things like suboptimal color coordination in the guest bathroom. It was blue and white, hardly offensive, an uninspired selection of window treatments in the living area. They were simple, functional blinds, and, My personal favorite, a generally lacking sense of decorative élan. Decorative élan. She was fining me for a lack of decorative élan. Attached was a bill for the locksmith she'd hired, and a new set of fines for these interior discrepancies. I crumpled the letter in my fist. This was beyond harassment. This was a declaration of war by a woman who clearly believed she was above the law, empowered by a flimsy HOA agreement and a board of directors too spineless or too stupid to challenge her. My first call was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol, who'd helped me with my initial house purchase. I explained the situation, reading Brenda's letter verbatim. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Carol let out a low whistle. "Mark," she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and what I can only describe as legal glee. "She put it in writing? She actually admitted to arranging for your locks to be changed and entering your home without your permission to critique your curtains? And my guest bathroom's color scheme?" I added, feeling a hysterical laugh bubble up. "Right," Carol said. "Okay, first, change your locks again, immediately. Document everything. The letter, the new locks, any damage. Take photos. Get a written statement from your locksmith, Sal, about the unauthorized lock change. Second, we're sending Miss McTavish and the entire HOA board a cease and desist letter that will make their hair curl. We're also exploring options for damages. This is illegal entry, trespass, potential conversion if they kept your old locks, harassment. Honestly, it's a smorgasbord of legal wrongdoing," she continued. "HOA bylaws, even the most restrictive ones, almost never grant the association the right to forcibly enter a private residence for aesthetic inspections, and certainly not by changing the locks. If there's a genuine emergency, a burst pipe flooding a neighbor, a fire, there might be provisions. But decorative élan? That's not going to fly in any court of law." Hearing Carol's professional fury and her immediate grasp of the situation was incredibly validating. I wasn't crazy. Brenda was out of control. Over the next few days, I meticulously gathered my evidence. I got a sworn affidavit from Sal, detailing his findings and the work he did. I took high-resolution photos of Brenda's letter, the envelope, the faint marks on my doorframe from her locksmith. I even found a half-empty, ostentatiously branded bottle of water her locksmith had left behind on my porch, another small piece of evidence tying the act back to an external party hired for the job without my consent. I researched HOA law in my state until my eyes burned. While HOAs had powers, they were not limitless. They could not supersede fundamental property rights or state and federal laws regarding trespass and illegal entry. Brenda's recently ratified neighborhood harmony protocols were nowhere to be found in any official HOA documentation I had access to or could find on the community website. They were, as I suspected, a figment of her power-tripping imagination. Meanwhile, I had my own locksmith, a more security-conscious professional than Sal. No offense to Sal, he was great in a pinch. Rekey all my doors with high-security Medico locks. They were expensive, but peace of mind was becoming priceless. The new keys felt heavy and reassuring in my hand, but it wasn't enough. A new lock could be picked, or, if Brenda was truly unhinged, bypassed again by another unauthorized locksmith if she thought she could get away with it. Her letter, her sheer audacity, had shown me she believed she could get away with anything. She believed she owned a part of my life, my home. That sense of violation lingered. Every time I walked into my house, I wondered where her eyes had roamed, what judgments she'd made. My home, my sanctuary, had been tainted by her intrusion. And the thought of her, or anyone from the HOA, believing they could just waltz in again whenever they pleased, fueled a new kind of resolve. I needed something more, something definitive, something that screamed, "This far and no further." Something that Brenda McTavish, with her oversized SUV and her undersized respect for personal property, would understand implicitly. It was while researching high-security door options, initially thinking of reinforced steel doors, that the idea began to form. It was a wild idea, an absurd idea, an engineer's over-the-top solution to a human problem. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. A bank vault door. Not a door like a bank vault door. An actual, honest-to-goodness, multi-ton, reinforced steel, multiple locking bolt bank vault door. The kind of door that laughs at locksmiths, that scoffs at crowbars. That would make Brenda McTavish's eyes water. The irony was delicious. She wanted access. She wanted to ensure standards. I'd give her a standard of security she couldn't possibly comprehend, let alone bypass. The sheer, unadulterated impracticality of it for a suburban home was part of its appeal. It was a statement, a monument to my unwillingness to be bullied. It was, in its own way, my ultimate act of decorative élan. And the best part? As far as I could tell from the HOA bylaws, after scrutinizing every single page again, there was absolutely nothing, not one word, about the type of front door you could have, as long as it was maintained in good repair and aesthetically congruous, a term I was now prepared to argue with the same tenacity I'd previously reserved for begonias. What could be more in good repair than solid steel? And aesthetically congruous? Well, aesthetics are subjective, aren't they, Brenda? The decision to install a bank vault door on my suburban house wasn't one I took lightly. Okay, maybe I took it a little lightly, fueled by righteous indignation and a craving for theatrical overkill, but I also approached it with the meticulousness of an engineer. This couldn't just be a grand gesture. It had to be feasible, structurally sound, and, importantly, something I could actually execute. My house was a modern build, sturdy, with a poured concrete foundation and steel-reinforced framing in places, but retrofitting a door that weighed several tons was not a weekend DIY project. I spent weeks in a deep dive of research. I contacted specialist security firms, companies that dealt with commercial safes, bank installations, and even panic rooms. Most were, understandably, a bit bewildered when I explained I wanted this for the front entrance of my single-family home in Willow Creek Estates. "Is this a high-crime area, sir?" one salesman asked, his voice dripping with polite confusion. "Only if you consider an overzealous HOA president a crime syndicate," I muttered, before clarifying, it was for enhanced personal security and peace of mind. I finally found a company based a few states over, Fortress Max Security Solutions. That didn't bat an eye. Their representative, a grizzled ex-military guy named Marcus, just said, "Sure, we can do that. You got the load-bearing capacity for the frame? What kind of locking mechanism you looking for? Timed? Biometric? Good old-fashioned combination?" His nonchalance was refreshing. We talked specifications. I didn't need something that could withstand a shaped charge, but I wanted it to be unmistakably, undeniably, a vault door. We settled on a custom-built model, slightly scaled down from their commercial offerings but still monstrously impressive. 8-inch thick solid steel composite, multiple 1.5-inch hardened steel locking bolts, a classic circular crank handle, and a high-security Sargent green leaf combination lock, with a secondary keyed Medico lock for day-to-day convenience. If you could call anything about this convenient, the door alone would weigh close to 2 tons. The frame, which would need to be custom fabricated and deeply integrated into the existing structure of my house, would add significantly more. This led to the next phase, structural assessment. I hired an independent structural engineer, a quiet, methodical woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. She listened to my plan, looked at my house's original blueprints, and then spent a day tapping walls, taking measurements, and doing complex calculations on her laptop. Her initial expression was one of profound skepticism, but as she delved into the blueprints and saw the existing robust construction of the entryway, thankfully, the original architect had a similar penchant for over-engineering certain aspects. Her skepticism slowly morphed into intrigued professionalism. "Your existing lintel above the doorway will need significant reinforcement, likely a custom steel I-beam," she concluded, pointing to a diagram. And we'll need to pour new concrete footings directly beneath the door jambs, extending down to the foundation, to distribute the weight. It's ambitious, but doable. Music to my ears. While all this clandestine planning was underway, Brenda was not idle. Having received Carol's scathing cease and desist letter regarding the illegal lock change and unauthorized entry, which also demanded full reimbursement for my locksmith, the cost of the new high-security Medico locks, and hinted darkly at further legal action for damages and emotional distress, Brenda had initially gone quiet. Too quiet. Then came the next wave of violations. Not from her directly, at first. Instead, anonymous complaints started appearing in the HOA's online portal, which the board, led by Brenda, was obligated to investigate. My lawn was suddenly unevenly mowed. It wasn't. My driveway had a suspicious oil stain. It was a watermark from the rain. My recycling bin was improperly placed by a whole 6 inches on collection day. Each complaint was followed by an official-looking notice from the HOA, penned with Brenda's characteristic passive-aggressive venom, now laced with a veneer of wounded professionalism. We are merely trying to uphold the standards that make Willow Creek Estates a desirable community for all, one letter pontificated. And it is disheartening when certain residents exhibit such disregard for communal harmony. Oh, the irony! She was trying to needle me, to bury me under an avalanche of petty grievances, hoping I'd crack or move out. She even tried to get my immediate neighbors to complain about me, but Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, told her to go fly a kite, and Mrs. Rodriguez next door, who had initially been intimidated by Brenda, found a new backbone after hearing about the lock incident and told Brenda that my lack of decorative elan was far preferable to Brenda's lack of basic human decency. Allies were emerging, emboldened by Brenda's clear overreach. The most audacious move during this period was the emergency landscape review. Brenda, accompanied by 2 nervous-looking board members, her ever-loyal enablers, a mousy accountant named Gerald, and a woman whose main qualification seemed to be her ability to nod enthusiastically at everything Brenda said, appeared on my doorstep one Saturday morning. I was in my garage, organizing tools, when I heard the peremptory knock. I opened the side door to see Brenda standing there, clipboard in hand, flanked by her acolytes. "Mr. Peterson," she announced, her voice overly bright, like a children's television presenter about to announce something deeply unpleasant. "We're conducting an emergency review of landscaping compliance. There have been concerns." "Concerns?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, deliberately not inviting them in. "About what precisely, Brenda? My begonias again? Or have the chickadees escalated their nefarious activities?" Gerald winced. Brenda's smile tightened. "This is no joking matter, Mr. Peterson. It has come to our attention that your property may be harboring invasive plant species, potentially in violation of Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 7, of the revised landscaping bylaws." She actually cited a paragraph. I was almost impressed. Invasive species? I looked around my meticulously kept and entirely native plant-focused front yard. I'd learned my begonia lesson, aesthetically speaking if not principally. Such as? Brenda consulted her clipboard with an air of great importance. "We have reports of unregulated dandelion growth near the rear perimeter." I stared at her. Dandelions. That was her emergency. In my backyard, which was fenced and largely invisible from the street. "You want to inspect my backyard for dandelions, Brenda?" She puffed up. "It is the HOA's right and duty to ensure all properties are compliant. We require access to the rear of the property." "No," I said simply. Her face mottled. "No? What do you mean, no? This is an official HOA inspection, and this is private property," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You are not coming into my backyard without a warrant or a court order, Brenda, especially not after your last uninvited foray into my home. Your concerns about dandelions do not constitute an emergency that overrides my property rights. Put your concerns in writing, as per the official grievance procedure you're so fond of, and I'll address them in writing." Gerald looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. The other board member was suddenly fascinated by a loose thread on her blouse. Brenda, however, seemed to swell with indignation. "This is an outrage. You are obstructing an official investigation. I will have you know this will be noted in your file. Fines will be levied." "Leave you away, Brenda," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "My lawyer, Carol, is getting quite a collection of your correspondence. She finds it very illuminating." The mention of Carol seemed to take some of the wind out of her sails. Her eyes narrowed, but she merely sniffed, made a theatrical note on her clipboard, and spun on her heel. "You will be hearing from us, Mr. Peterson," she called back over her shoulder as she marched towards her tank-like SUV, her 2 flustered board members scurrying in her wake. This little encounter just solidified my resolve. The vault door wasn't just about preventing entry. It was about sending an unmistakable message. It was about drawing a line in concrete and steel. The logistics for the door installation were complex. Fortress Max Security Solutions was professional, but their quote was eye-watering, covering custom fabrication, reinforced crating, specialized heavy-lift transportation, and a team of 4 installers who would need accommodation for the 3 days estimated for the job. Dr. Sharma, the structural engineer, coordinated with them on the reinforcement requirements. This involved pouring new, deep concrete footings under the threshold and installing a massive steel I-beam above the doorframe, all tied into the existing structure. This preliminary work had to be done discreetly. I hired a local contractor, a friend of a friend sworn to secrecy, who framed it as essential foundation and lintel repairs due to settling. We timed the noisiest parts for when Brenda was reliably at her Tuesday morning golf game. It was a tense period. A lot of money flying out of my account. A lot of coordination. I felt like I was orchestrating a covert operation. The door itself took 8 weeks to fabricate. 8 weeks of Brenda's escalating petty harassments and my equally escalating anticipation. The day I got the call from Fortress Max, that Project Sanctuary, as I'd code-named it, was ready for shipping, I felt a surge of triumph. This was it. The ultimate non-compliant, yet perfectly legal statement. I just hoped Brenda would pick the right day to come snooping again after it was in. The arrival of the bank vault door was an event in itself. It came on a massive flatbed truck, cocooned in heavy-duty crating and draped in tarpaulins, looking less like a household fixture and more like a decommissioned piece of military hardware. Marcus from Fortress Max and his 3-man crew, all built like brick outhouses, were professionals to the core. They'd coordinated with a local heavy-lifting crane company, and the sight of my new front door being hoisted over my rooftop, and carefully maneuvered towards the gaping hole, where my old door and its frame used to be, drew a small crowd of curious neighbors. Mr. Henderson stood on his porch, jaw slack. Mrs. Rodriguez was filming it on her phone, a wide grin on her face. Even some of the residents I didn't know well were peeking out from behind their curtains. Brenda, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen. I'd specifically timed the most dramatic phase of the installation for a Wednesday afternoon, when she usually attended her Advanced Power Networking for Executive Women luncheon, or whatever equally self-important event she graced with her presence. The installation process was a symphony of controlled power and precision engineering. The new reinforced steel door frame, which had been delivered and set a few days prior during the foundation work, was a beast in itself. Bolted and welded into the reinforced lintel and concrete footings Dr. Sharma had designed. The vault door itself, once uncrated, was a thing of brutalist beauty. Gleaming, raw, burnished steel, nearly a foot thick, with the intricate workings of the Sargent green-leaf combination lock visible on its inner face before the final cover plate went on. The circular crank handle looked like it belonged on a submarine hatch. It slid into the frame with a surprisingly gentle whoosh, guided by the crane and Marcus's expert crew, settling into place with a satisfying, definitive thud that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the house. The installers worked for 3 days, meticulously fitting, welding, calibrating. They were unfailingly polite, explaining to my awestruck neighbors who wandered over that it was a custom high-security installation. No one asked too many questions. The sheer presence of the door seemed to command a certain respectful silence. The cost was, as anticipated, astronomical. It ate up a significant chunk of my savings, but every time I imagined Brenda's face when she first encountered it, I considered it an investment in long-term peace and exquisite schadenfreude. While the door was clearly industrial, Fortress Max had done a surprisingly good job with the external finish. It was a dark, brushed graphite that, while undeniably formidable, didn't look entirely out of place with my home's modern, somewhat minimalist architecture. Or so, I told myself. Who was I kidding? It looked like a bank had crash-landed into a suburban street, and it was magnificent. The first time I spun that big, heavy wheel and heard the massive bolt slide home with a series of satisfying clunks, I felt a profound sense of security I hadn't realized I'd been missing so acutely. This wasn't just a door. It was a statement of intent. It said, "My home is my castle, and you, madam, are definitively not invited." Of course, I knew the real test was yet to come. Brenda couldn't stay away forever. Her obsession with my non-compliance was too deeply ingrained. Carol, my lawyer, had advised me to install a high-definition security camera with good audio capture focused on my front porch, just in case. I'd taken her advice, opting for a discreet model that blended into the new, reinforced door frame. It was primed and ready. It took another week. I went about my business, enjoying the quiet solidity of my new entryway. I even started working out a plausible explanation for any curious official inquiries, something about rising concerns over local security and a proactive approach to asset protection. Not that any official inquiries ever came beyond the bewildered admiration of the pizza delivery guy. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I was enjoying a cup of coffee and reviewing some schematics for a work project, my security camera app pinged my phone. Live feed, and there she was. Brenda McTavish, in all her glory, marching up my driveway. She was wearing a particularly obnoxious lemon-yellow pantsuit, clutching her ever-present clipboard. She had Gerald, the mousy accountant, trailing in her wake, looking even more uncomfortable than usual. This was it. Showtime. I watched on my monitor, a grimly satisfied smile on my face. Brenda reached my front porch. She stopped. She blinked. Her perfectly coiffed head tilted, as if trying to process an optical illusion. I could almost see the error messages scrolling behind her eyes. She took a hesitant step closer, peering at the expanse of brushed graphite steel, the formidable circular handle, the glint of the combination lock. Gerald bumped into her from behind, not looking where he was going, his eyes also wide with disbelief. Brenda slowly reached out a perfectly manicured finger, laden with several large gaudy rings, and tentatively poked the door, as if to confirm it was real. I could hear her faintly through the camera's microphone. What in the Sam Hill is that?" she muttered, her voice a stunned whisper. Gerald, equally flabbergasted, just mumbled something incoherent. Brenda recovered some of her usual bluster. She straightened her lemon-yellow jacket, rapped sharply on the door with her knuckles. It made a dull, unsatisfying thud against the thick steel. "Mr. Peterson, this is President McTavish. Open this door immediately. We are here for a scheduled follow-up compliance review." I sipped my coffee. I wasn't moving. Let her stew. She rapped again, harder this time, then grabbed the massive circular handle and tried to turn it. It didn't budge, of course. It was designed to resist considerably more than Brenda's indignation. "Mr. Peterson!" she shrieked, her voice escalating in pitch and volume. "This is an official HOA matter. You are required to grant us access. What have you done to your doorway?" She was practically screeching now, her face turning an unbecoming shade of puce that clashed spectacularly with her yellow suit. "Is this some kind of illegal modification? This is not an approved door style. I've never seen anything like it. This is a violation." I decided it was time to make an appearance, but not by opening the door. That was out of the question. Instead, I activated the two-way audio on the security camera. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and amplified slightly by the speaker. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your unscheduled visit?" Brenda jumped back as if the door itself had spoken. She stared wildly at the camera, which I knew was fairly discreet. "Peterson, is that you? Where are you? Open this door. What is this monstrosity?" "This, Brenda," I said, savoring the moment, "is my new front door. State-of-the-art security. Rather nice, don't you think? And no, I will not be opening it. As I've told you before, you are not welcome on my property or in my home without a legally binding court order." "Court order? Don't be ridiculous," she sputtered. "We are the Homeowners Association. We have bylaws. You cannot just install a bunker door on your house. This is completely against aesthetic regulations." "Oh, I don't know, Brenda," I mused. "I reread the bylaws very carefully. Section 7, subsection C, regarding exterior doors and entryways. It states doors must be maintained in good repair and present an aesthetically congruous appearance with the neighborhood's established character. This door is certainly in excellent repair. It's brand new and virtually indestructible. And as for aesthetically congruous, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I find it quite harmonious." Very secure chic. Gerald was now visibly trying to back away, edging towards the steps. Brenda, however, was made of sterner, or perhaps just denser stuff. "This is an outrage. This is an affront to the entire community. I am the president, and I demand you remove this thing and restore a normal door immediately." "Demand all you like, Brenda," I replied cheerfully. "But no, this door stays, and for the record, my lawyer has a copy of the bylaws too, and she concurs. There's nothing explicitly forbidding this particular style of high-security door. Perhaps you should have been more specific in your rulemaking." Brenda looked like she was about to have an aneurysm. Her face was crimson, her fists clenched. You can't do this. I will call the police. I will have you cited for unauthorized fortification." "Please, do call the police, Brenda," I said, my voice laced with amusement. I'd be very interested to hear their take on an HOA president demanding entry into a private residence without cause, especially after your previous illegal entry. I'm sure they'd also be fascinated by my new door. Perhaps they'd like a demonstration of its security features. That seemed to give her pause. The mention of her previous illegal entry hung in the air. Her eyes darted around, perhaps realizing that her little tantrum was being recorded. Gerald seized his moment. "Brenda, perhaps we should consult the HOA's legal counsel before proceeding?" he stammered, tugging at her sleeve. For once, Brenda seemed to deflate slightly. She glared at the unyielding steel door, then back towards where my voice was coming from. The fight wasn't gone from her eyes, but a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even fear, had joined it. "This isn't over, Peterson," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is a gross violation. You will rue this day." She spun on her heel, almost tripping in her haste, and stomped back towards her ridiculous SUV, Gerald scurrying after her like a chastened poodle. I watched them go, a wave of profound satisfaction washing over me. The door hadn't just kept Brenda out, it had visibly shattered her composure, her illusion of absolute authority. It was a physical manifestation of boundaries she could not cross. My fortress was secure. The Battle of Begonia Drive, as I was privately calling it, was won. But the war for Willow Creek Estates, I suspected, had just entered a fascinating new phase. The aftermath of the Great Vault Door reveal was everything I had hoped for, and more. News of Peterson's fortress, as it quickly became known, spread through Willow Creek Estates like wildfire. Mrs. Rodriguez, my next-door neighbor, had indeed captured Brenda's meltdown on her phone and, with my discreet permission, shared it with a few other disgruntled residents who had long suffered under Brenda's reign. Suddenly, I wasn't just the oddball who planted the wrong flowers. I was a local legend. the guy who stood up to Brenda McTavish and won, in spectacular fashion. The HOA board meeting following the incident was, by all accounts, epic. Mr. Henderson, who still attended occasionally out of a sense of civic duty and a desire for local gossip, gave me a gleeful, blow-by-blow account. Apparently, Brenda had tried to ram through an emergency amendment to the bylaws, specifically banning bank vault doors, fortified entryways, and any door mechanism requiring a circular crank handle or combination lock. She presented it as a vital measure to preserve the traditional aesthetic integrity of our beloved community and prevent anarchy and dangerous precedents. However, for the first time in recent memory, the board didn't just rubber stamp her wishes. Several members, including the usually timid Gerald, who I suspect, had been deeply unnerved by being an accomplice to Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior and possibly swayed by Carol's earlier, very stern letter that had named him as party to the trespass, actually pushed back. They questioned the legality of such a retroactive and overly specific rule. They pointed out that my door, however unconventional, wasn't actually violating any existing written bylaws. My lawyer, Carol, had preemptively sent another letter to each board member, politely outlining my property rights, referencing state laws on arbitrary rule changes, and gently reminding them of their potential personal liability if they knowingly enforced illegal or improperly ratified HOA covenants, especially in light of Brenda's prior actions, which were already subject to legal scrutiny. This, combined with the growing discontent among residents, many of whom were now openly chuckling about the vault door and Brenda's fury, created a perfect storm. Brenda's motion to ban my door failed to get a second. She was reportedly incandescent with rage, accusing the board of cowardice and betrayal. The Brenda Bling Empire, as some neighbors had started calling it, was showing cracks. Legally, Brenda had no further recourse regarding the door itself. She did, however, try to escalate the petty fines. I received notices for unnatural metallic sheen emanating from a primary entryway, failure to provide adequate visitor welcome due to intimidating portal structure, and my personal favorite, creating a neighborhood disturbance by means of overtly defensive architecture. Each fine was duly forwarded to Carol, who bundled them up with our ongoing claim for damages related to the illegal lock change. She informed the HOA's increasingly stressed legal counsel that each new frivolous fine was simply adding to the quantum of damages for harassment we would be seeking. The HOA's lawyer, a weary-looking man named Thompson, who I imagine was regretting ever taking on their account, started advising the board to exercise extreme caution. The financial repercussions of Brenda's vendetta were beginning to hit home for the other board members. They were looking at mounting legal fees, a potentially significant payout to me for the trespass and harassment, and the very real possibility of their directors' and officers' insurance premiums skyrocketing if the insurer didn't drop them altogether due to Brenda's recklessness. Meanwhile, my vault door became a minor local landmark. People would slow down their cars driving by. Some even took photos. The pizza delivery guy started calling me Fort Knox. Mr. Henderson would bring over cookies and ask for updates from the command center. There was a new lightness in the neighborhood, a sense that the tide was turning. Residents who had previously been too intimidated to speak out against Brenda's absurd edicts started questioning things. They challenged fines, demanded transparency in HOA spending, and began discussing the possibility of a special election to recall the president and elect a new board. The vault door, in its silent, steely defiance, had become a symbol of resistance. Brenda McTavish, deprived of her ability to directly harass me at my doorstep or inside my home, grew more erratic. She was seen pacing her own front lawn, muttering to herself. Her attempts to control other aspects of the neighborhood became more desperate and illogical, leading to further pushback. The final nail in Brenda's HOA coffin came a few months later. Carol's legal pressure, combined with the detailed evidence of the illegal entry, her admission in writing, and the subsequent campaign of harassment, was proving overwhelming for the HOA's defense. their lawyer advised them to settle. The settlement was significant. The HOA, or rather their insurer, paid for all my legal fees, the full cost of Sal's emergency locksmith work, the Medico high-security locks I'd installed before the vault door, and a hefty sum for damages, emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. Crucially, as part of the settlement, Brenda McTavish was required to issue a formal, written apology to me, to be circulated to all homeowners, acknowledging her unauthorized actions. She was also under immense pressure from the increasingly rebellious board and the threat of multiple recall petitions, forced to resign as president and from the board entirely. Her reign of terror was over. The apology, when it came, was a masterpiece of reluctant contrition, clearly drafted by a lawyer trying to minimize her client's humiliation while still meeting the settlement terms. But it was an apology nonetheless, and her resignation was very, very real. Willow Creek Estates held a special election. A new board was voted in, composed of reasonable people, including Mrs. Rodriguez, and surprisingly, a reformed Gerald, who seemed eager to atone for his previous complicity. The 300-page book of bylaws underwent a serious review. Many of Brenda's more ridiculous and ambiguous rules were struck out, and new clauses were added to protect homeowner rights and clearly define the limits of HOA authority, especially regarding property access. My bank vault door? It stayed. It had become such a legend that the new board didn't dare touch it, and besides, as I'd always maintained, it technically violated no clear pre-existing rule. It stands today as a testament to one woman's outrageous overreach and one man's slightly over-the-top but ultimately effective response. Sometimes, when I'm spinning that big satisfying wheel to secure my home for the night, I think of Brenda. I don't know what happened to her after she resigned, and subsequently, rather quickly, sold her house and moved away. Rumor has it, to a community with no HOA whatsoever, the irony. But I hope, wherever she is, she's learned a valuable lesson about respecting boundaries. As for me, I enjoy my quiet, secure, and decoratively elan-lacking home. The begonias are whatever damn color I choose. My bird feeder attracts a delightful variety of avian friends, and my front door is a constant reminder that sometimes, to protect your peace, you have to get a little bit fortressy. The experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, the importance of knowing your rights, and the surprising power of meticulous research, a good lawyer, and, if all else fails, several tons of reinforced steel. So, if you're ever dealing with an out-of-control HOA, remember my story. You might not need to go full bank vault, but never underestimate the power of pushing back with facts, determination, and just a touch of glorious, well-engineered defiance. Thanks for sticking around for this wild ride, and if you've got your own crazy HOA story, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. You never know, it might inspire my next home improvement project. Though, hopefully, it won't need to be quite this extreme.